I stepped onto Flight 723 with my carry-on bag slung over my shoulder, wearing jeans and a simple navy sweater. Nothing fancy, nothing that screamed authority. Just another passenger heading to Seattle for what I hoped would be a quiet positioning flight. The gate agent had confirmed my first-class seat assignment, and I walked down the narrow aisle toward row 3. That's when I encountered him. A young man in an expensive suit stood blocking the aisle, arms crossed, staring me down like I'd committed some unforgivable crime. "Excuse me," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "This section is for executives only. You need to move back to economy where you belong." I blinked, certain I'd misheard, but his smirk told me everything I needed to know. The young man stepped closer, clearly enjoying the power he thought he wielded. His name tag read, Trevor Morrison, Corporate Intern, and he wore it like a badge of honor. "Mom, I'm going to need you to gather your things and head to the back of the plane. These seats are reserved for business travelers and company executives." I pulled out my boarding pass, keeping my voice steady. "I'm in 3A. This is my assigned seat." Trevor barely glanced at the boarding pass before waving it away. "Look, I don't know how you managed to scam your way into first class, but I work for this airline. I know the policies." He raised his voice so other passengers could hear. "These seats cost $3,000 each. You're clearly not the type who can afford that." My cheeks burned, but I maintained my composure. Behind Trevor, other first-class passengers had settled into their seats, pretending not to watch while obviously listening to every word. A businessman in row 2 adjusted his glasses and looked uncomfortable. An elderly woman clutched her purse tighter. "I understand there might be some confusion," I said calmly, "but this is definitely my seat. Perhaps you could check with the gate agent if there's a concern." Trevor laughed, a harsh sound that echoed through the cabin. "Confusion, lady. The only confusion here is how you thought you could pull this off." He pulled out his phone and started taking pictures of me. "I'm documenting this whole situation. We take fraud very seriously." The flight attendant, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and graying hair, approached hesitantly. Her name tag read, Sarah. "Is everything okay here?" Trevor immediately shifted his attention to her, his entire demeanor becoming smooth and professional. "Sarah, right? I'm Trevor Morrison from corporate headquarters. We've got a passenger here trying to occupy a seat she didn't pay for. I need you to escort her to the back of the plane." Sarah looked between us, clearly uncomfortable. "Sir, if she has a boarding pass for that seat—" "I'm telling you, she doesn't belong here," Trevor interrupted. "I've been working with the executive team all summer. I know who's supposed to be on this flight, and she's not on the list." He gestured at my casual clothes. "Look at her. Does she look like someone who belongs in first class?" I felt the weight of every passenger's stare. A mother with 2 small children had stopped loading her bag into the overhead compartment to watch the confrontation. The businessman in row 2 was now openly staring, his laptop forgotten. Trevor continued his performance, his voice getting louder with each word. "You know what the problem is with airlines today? They don't enforce their own policies. People think they can just walk onto a plane and sit wherever they want. Well, not on my watch." He started typing furiously on his phone. "I'm posting about this right now. Social media is a powerful tool for accountability." He held up his phone so I could see the screen. "Passenger attempting seat theft on Flight 723. Claiming first-class privileges without payment. This is why we need better security measures." The post had already gotten 3 likes and 2 comments. My stomach twisted as I realized he was making this public, turning my quiet flight into a spectacle for his online followers. Sarah wrung her hands. "Maybe we should wait for—" "No," Trevor cut her off again. "I'm calling airline security right now. This woman is disrupting the flight and I want her removed from the aircraft." He dialed a number on his phone, speaking loudly enough for the entire cabin to hear. "Yes, this is Trevor Morrison from corporate. I need security at gate 12 immediately. We have a passenger attempting to defraud the airline and refusing to cooperate with crew instructions." My heart pounded as I watched this young man systematically destroy my reputation in front of dozens of strangers. But something inside me stayed calm. a voice reminding me that truth has a way of surfacing even in the darkest moments. Trevor ended his call with a satisfied smile. They'll be here in 5 minutes. I suggest you gather your things and save yourself the embarrassment of being escorted off this plane in handcuffs. True to Trevor's prediction, 2 airport security officers appeared at the aircraft door within minutes. The lead officer, a tall man with graying temples and a no-nonsense expression, wore a badge that read, Marcus Chen, Security Supervisor. Trevor immediately approached them with the confidence of someone accustomed to being heard. Officers, thank you for responding so quickly. I'm Trevor Morrison, summer intern with the airline's corporate strategy division. He handed Marcus a business card. This passenger, he pointed at me, has been causing a significant disruption. She's attempting to occupy a first-class seat without proper documentation, and when I politely asked her to move, she became hostile and threatening. Marcus looked at me, then back at Trevor. Sir, what exactly was the nature of the threat? Without missing a beat, Trevor pulled out his phone and showed Marcus a voice recording. I captured her verbal assault right here. She said, and I quote, You don't know who you're messing with. I have connections that could ruin your career. That sounds like a threat to me. My mouth fell open. I had never said those words, but Trevor's recording was crystal clear, and it was definitely a woman's voice saying exactly what he claimed. I also have witness statements. Trevor continued, producing several cocktail napkins with handwriting on them. 3 passengers heard her threatening remarks and were concerned enough to document what they observed. Marcus examined the napkins. Each one contained a brief statement describing my alleged aggressive behavior, signed by different passengers. One claimed I had pushed Trevor. Another said I had used profanity. A third described me as clearly intoxicated and belligerent. Ma'am, Marcus addressed me directly. Can you explain your side of this situation? Before I could respond, Trevor interrupted again. Officer, I should mention that I've been authorized by my supervisor to act on behalf of the airline in situations like this. Let me call my uncle who serves on the board of directors. He can confirm my authority. Trevor dialed another number, putting the call on speakerphone. Uncle Richard, it's Trevor. I'm dealing with a passenger situation on Flight 723, and I need you to confirm my authorization to handle airline security matters. A gravelly voice came through the speaker. Trevor, you have my full support to protect the company's interests. Do whatever is necessary to maintain order and safety. Thank you, Uncle Richard. I'll handle this professionally. Trevor ended the call and turned back to Marcus. As you can see, I have direct authorization from board-level management. Marcus nodded slowly. Sir, do you have any official documentation of this authorization? Trevor reached into his briefcase and pulled out what appeared to be an official airline document with letterhead and signatures. This temporary authorization was issued to me yesterday for exactly these types of situations. It gives me the authority to investigate passenger disputes and recommend appropriate action. The document looked legitimate, complete with official seals and multiple signatures. Marcus studied it carefully while Trevor continued his explanation. The airline has been having significant problems with passenger fraud lately, Trevor said. People buy economy tickets and then try to intimidate their way into premium seating. It's been costing the company millions of dollars annually. He gestured toward me again. This particular passenger is clearly engaging in this exact type of fraud. When I politely explained the seating policy, she immediately became aggressive and threatening. I believe she may also be under the influence of alcohol or drugs, which would explain her irrational behavior. Sarah, the flight attendant, shifted nervously nearby. Marcus turned to her. Miss, did you witness this interaction? Sarah glanced between Trevor and me, then looked down at her feet. I saw some of the conversation. There was definitely a disagreement about the seating arrangement. Did you hear the passenger make any threatening statements? Marcus pressed. Sarah hesitated for a long moment. Well, there were raised voices, and the passenger did seem frustrated. Trevor nodded approvingly. Exactly. And when someone is frustrated about being caught in fraudulent behavior, they often lash out at the people trying to enforce company policy. Marcus made notes on his clipboard. Ma'am, I'm going to need to see your identification and boarding documentation. We also need to discuss your alleged threatening statements against Mr. Morrison. I reached for my purse, my hands shaking slightly. This situation was spiraling completely out of control, and I felt helpless to stop it. Trevor had constructed an elaborate web of lies, complete with fake evidence and intimidated witnesses. Officer, Trevor added, I should also mention that this passenger has been live streaming this entire confrontation on social media, likely to rally support for her fraudulent claims. This suggests a pattern of manipulative behavior. Marcus looked at my phone, which was sitting quietly in my hand. Ma'am, have you been recording or broadcasting this interaction? No, I haven't, I said firmly. Trevor shook his head sadly. That's exactly what someone would say if they were trying to hide their illegal activities. I think you should check her phone for evidence. The walls felt like they were closing in around me. Every word I spoke seemed to make the situation worse, while Trevor's lies grew more elaborate and convincing with each passing minute. The gate agent, a harried-looking woman in her 30s, hurried onto the aircraft carrying a clipboard and wearing an expression of barely controlled panic. I'm sorry for the delay, folks. We're just working through a passenger verification issue. Trevor immediately positioned himself as the voice of authority. Jennifer, right. He read her name tag with the familiarity of someone accustomed to commanding attention. I'm Trevor Morrison from corporate. We've identified a significant security concern that needs immediate resolution. Jennifer nodded deferentially. Yes, Mr. Morrison, I received the alert from your office. How can I assist? This passenger, Trevor pointed at me with theatrical precision, has been engaging in multiple violations of airline policy. We have documented evidence of fraud, threatening behavior, and disruption of flight operations. I'm recommending immediate removal and a permanent ban from all future flights. He handed Jennifer a folder that seemed to materialize from nowhere. I've prepared a complete incident report including witness statements, audio evidence, and photographs of the fraudulent documentation she attempted to use. Jennifer flipped through the pages, her expression growing more serious with each document. This is quite comprehensive, Mr. Morrison. I can see why corporate sent you to handle this personally. The airline's reputation is at stake here. Trevor continued, his voice carrying the weight of corporate authority. We cannot allow passengers to think they can intimidate their way into premium services they haven't purchased. It sets a dangerous precedent. Marcus, the security supervisor, studied the additional documentation Trevor had provided. Mr. Morrison, this incident report mentions potential criminal charges. Are you recommending we involve local law enforcement? Absolutely, Trevor replied without hesitation. Fraud, theft of services, making terrorist threats, assault, and disruption of civil aviation operations. This passenger has violated both company policy and federal regulations. My hands trembled as I listened to the growing list of fabricated charges. Each accusation felt like another nail in a coffin I couldn't escape. The other passengers watched with a mixture of curiosity and judgment, their faces reflecting their belief in Trevor's expertly crafted narrative. Trevor pulled out his phone again, this time showing the screen to Jennifer and Marcus. I've been live streaming this entire incident to document proper security procedures for training purposes. As you can see, we already have over 2,000 viewers and hundreds of supportive comments from airline employees and passengers who appreciate us taking a strong stance against fraud. The phone screen showed a live video feed with a constant stream of comments scrolling by. Throw her off the plane. Finally, someone standing up to these scammers. She looks guilty as hell. Thank you for protecting honest passengers. The public response has been overwhelmingly supportive, Trevor explained. People are tired of seeing fraudulent passengers get away with theft. They want to see consequences. Jennifer made additional notes on her clipboard. Mr. Morrison, what's the timeline for removing this passenger? We're already 20 minutes behind schedule. I understand the operational concerns, Trevor replied professionally, but we need to follow proper protocol. I've requested backup from airport police to ensure this removal is handled safely and legally. As if summoned by his words, 2 police officers appeared at the aircraft entrance. They wore the standard uniform of the airport authority police, complete with badges and radios crackling with dispatcher communications. Trevor greeted them with the same confident authority he'd shown everyone else. "Officers, thank you for responding. I'm Trevor Morrison, representing Airline Corporate Security. We have a passenger who's committed multiple federal violations and needs to be removed and arrested immediately." The lead officer, a woman in her 40s with short blonde hair, introduced herself. "I'm Officer Patricia Williams. Can you walk me through the specific charges?" Trevor consulted his folder again. Fraud, theft of services, making threatening statements, assault on airline personnel, and violation of federal aviation regulations regarding passenger compliance. We have multiple witnesses and documented evidence of each violation. Officer Williams looked at me with the professional detachment of someone who dealt with airline disputes daily. "Ma'am, do you understand these charges?" "I understand that this young man has fabricated every single one of them," I said, my voice steady, despite the chaos surrounding me. Trevor shook his head with practiced disappointment. "Officer, that's exactly the kind of denial and deflection we've been dealing with throughout this incident. The evidence speaks for itself." He handed Officer Williams a copy of his comprehensive incident report. "As you can see, we have audio recordings, witness statements, and photographic evidence. This passenger has also been broadcasting false information about airline security procedures on social media, which could constitute an additional federal violation." The second police officer, a younger man with dark hair and an earnest expression, studied the documents carefully. "This is pretty detailed, Mr. Morrison. How long have you been investigating this passenger?" "The investigation began the moment she attempted to board this aircraft with fraudulent documentation," Trevor replied. "Corporate security protocols require immediate documentation of any suspected criminal activity." Officer Williams made notes in a small notebook. "Ma'am, I need to inform you that you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Do you understand these rights?" The world seemed to tilt sideways as I heard my Miranda rights being read aloud. Other passengers whispered among themselves, their phones out, capturing every moment of my public humiliation. Trevor stepped back slightly, allowing the officers room to work, while maintaining his position as the authority figure. "Officers, I should mention that we're also concerned about this passenger's potential involvement in a larger fraud ring. Her behavior suggests professional-level deception training." My vision blurred as the accusations continued to multiply. I felt trapped in a nightmare where every word I spoke only made things worse, while Trevor's lies grew more convincing and elaborate with each passing moment. The flight was now more than 30 minutes delayed, and I could see the frustration on passengers' faces as they realized their travel plans were being disrupted by what they believed to be my criminal behavior. The cockpit door opened with a soft click that somehow cut through all the commotion in the cabin. A man in a crisp pilot's uniform emerged, his captain's bars gleaming under the cabin lights. He moved with the confident stride of someone accustomed to command, his eyes quickly taking in the scene before him. Trevor's entire demeanor shifted the moment he spotted the uniform. The arrogant intern transformed into an eager subordinate, straightening his tie and stepping forward with an ingratiating smile. "Captain Johnson," Trevor called out, extending his hand enthusiastically. "What perfect timing! I'm Trevor Morrison from corporate headquarters. I was hoping to introduce myself during this flight." The captain shook Trevor's hand politely, his expression neutral. "Mr. Morrison, I understand there's some kind of situation causing a delay with my flight." "Yes, sir," Trevor replied, his voice now carrying a tone of respectful efficiency. "I've been handling a passenger security incident according to company protocol. This individual," he gestured toward me, "has been attempting to defraud the airline and has become increasingly hostile when confronted with evidence of her violations." Captain Johnson nodded slowly, his eyes moving from Trevor to the police officers to the various airline personnel scattered throughout the cabin. "I see. And you've documented all of this properly." "Absolutely, Captain." Trevor beamed with pride. I have comprehensive evidence, including witness statements, audio recordings, and photographic documentation. I've also coordinated with airport security and local law enforcement to ensure proper handling of what appears to be multiple federal violations. The captain's expression remained professionally neutral. That's very thorough, Mr. Morrison. I appreciate corporate's attention to security matters. He paused, looking around the cabin at the delayed passengers and the growing crowd of official personnel. However, I do need to understand exactly what's preventing my flight from departing on schedule. Trevor launched into an animated recap of events, clearly relishing the opportunity to demonstrate his competence to a senior airline employee. The situation began when this passenger attempted to occupy a first-class seat without proper authorization. When I politely explained company seating policies, she became verbally aggressive and threatened my career prospects. Captain Johnson listened patiently as Trevor detailed his version of events, occasionally nodding or asking for clarification on specific points. His questions seemed designed to draw out more information rather than challenge Trevor's narrative. "So this passenger claimed to have some kind of special status with the airline?" the captain asked. "Yes, sir," Trevor replied eagerly. "She made several references to having connections that could damage my career. Classic intimidation tactics used by professional fraudsters. That's when I realized we were dealing with someone who had experience in this type of criminal activity." The captain's eyes moved to me for the first time since emerging from the cockpit. "And what exactly did this passenger claim her status to be?" Trevor waved dismissively. "She tried several different stories. First, she claimed the seat was legitimately assigned to her. Then, she suggested she had some kind of relationship with airline management. When those lies didn't work, she started making vague threats about her connections in the industry." Captain Johnson continued to study my face with professional interest. "Did she specify what type of industry connections?" "Nothing credible," Trevor responded confidently. "Just the typical desperate claims people make when they're caught in criminal activity. She mentioned something about working in aviation, which is obviously ridiculous given her appearance and behavior." The captain's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture. "Mr. Morrison, I'd like to speak with this passenger directly if you don't mind." Trevor looked slightly surprised, but quickly nodded his agreement. "Of course, Captain. Though I should warn you that she's been increasingly hostile throughout this interaction. You might want security personnel to remain close in case she becomes violent again." Captain Johnson approached me with measured steps, his eyes never leaving my face. When he was close enough to speak without the entire cabin hearing, he said, in a voice that carried just the right mixture of authority and familiarity, "Is there a problem here, Captain?" The word hung in the air like a bell that couldn't be unrung. Trevor's confident smile faltered as his brain processed what he'd just heard. The police officers looked confused. Jennifer, the gate agent, stared with her mouth slightly open. "Captain," Trevor repeated, his voice cracking slightly on the word. I stood up slowly, meeting Captain Johnson's familiar gaze with relief and gratitude. "Hello, Derek. Yes, there seems to be some confusion about my qualifications to occupy this seat." Trevor's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, recognition, and finally pure terror. "Captain, did you just call her Captain?" Derek Johnson, whom I'd flown with several times over the past 5 years, turned back to Trevor with the same neutral professionalism he'd maintained throughout the conversation. "Mr. Morrison, I'd like you to meet Captain Ashleigh Davis. She's one of our most senior pilots and has been with the airline for 15 years. The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear the air conditioning system cycling in the background. Every passenger, every airline employee, every police officer stood frozen as the reality of the situation slowly dawned on them. Trevor's mouth opened and closed several times without producing any sound. His face had gone completely pale and his hands were shaking as he stared at me with dawning horror. "Now," I said quietly, looking directly at Trevor, "I believe you mentioned something about putting me on a no-fly list." Derek immediately pulled out his phone and dialed the operations center. This is Captain Johnson on Flight 723. I need to speak with the duty manager immediately regarding a significant passenger incident. Trevor stood frozen in the aisle. His earlier confidence completely evaporated. He watched Derek's phone call with growing panic, clearly understanding that his web of lies was about to unravel completely. Yes, this is regarding passenger services, Derek continued into his phone. We have a situation where one of our own captains has been falsely accused of multiple violations by someone claiming corporate authority. He paused, listening. Captain Ashleigh Davis, employee number 47921. I could hear the voice on the other end of the line, though I couldn't make out specific words. Derek's expression grew more serious as he listened. I understand, Derek said finally. Yes, we'll need a complete investigation, and yes, I think you'll want to review the employment status of the individual making these accusations. Trevor suddenly came to life, fumbling for his own phone. I need to call my uncle. This is all a misunderstanding. He can clear this up immediately. He dialed frantically, putting the call on speakerphone as he had before. But this time, instead of reaching the authoritative voice that had supported him earlier, he got a voicemail message. You've reached Trevor Morrison, Director of Strategic Planning. I'm currently in a board meeting and unable to take calls. Please leave a detailed message and I'll respond as soon as possible. Trevor's hands shook as he ended the call and immediately tried again. Same result. He tried a third time, then a fourth each attempt, producing the same automated voicemail message. Officer Williams, who had been watching this exchange with growing suspicion, turned to Trevor. Mr. Morrison, I'm going to need to see some official identification and verification of your employment status. Trevor reached for his wallet, but his movements were clumsy and desperate. The confident corporate intern who had dominated the scene just minutes earlier was now fumbling with simple tasks. Meanwhile, Derek's phone conversation was providing clarity about the real situation. Yes, I understand, he said to the operations center. So there's no record of any Trevor Morrison being authorized to make passenger removal decisions. He listened for another moment, and the documentation he provided was fabricated. Another pause. I see. Thank you for clarifying. Derek ended his call and turned to address the gathered crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, I've just spoken with our operations center. They confirm that Captain Davis is indeed one of our most senior pilots and has been with the company for 15 years. They also confirm that no intern or temporary employee has been given authority to make passenger removal decisions. Trevor's phone finally connected to a live person, but the conversation did not go as he had hoped. Uncle Richard, Trevor said desperately, thank God you answered. I'm dealing with a situation on a flight, and I need you to confirm my authority to... But the voice that came through the speaker was cold and angry. Trevor, what the hell are you doing? I just got a call from airline operations asking about you. Do you realize what you've done? I was handling a passenger situation according to company policy, Trevor replied weakly. You were fired yesterday, Richard Morrison's voice boomed through the phone. I terminated your internship personally after you were caught using company credentials to get free meals and airport lounge access. You're not even supposed to be at the airport, let alone on an aircraft. The silence that followed was deafening. Every person in the cabin now understood that Trevor had been impersonating an airline employee while making false accusations against an actual airline captain. Marcus, the security supervisor, stepped forward with his handcuffs ready. Mr. Morrison, you're under arrest for impersonation of airline personnel filing false police reports and fraud. Trevor tried to back away, but there was nowhere to go in the narrow aircraft aisle. Wait, this is all a misunderstanding. I was just trying to protect the airline's interests. I thought she was really a fraud. Officer Williams began reading Trevor the Miranda rights that she had mistakenly read to me just minutes earlier. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. As the officers placed Trevor in handcuffs, one of the first-class passengers, an elderly woman who had witnessed the entire incident, stood up and began to applaud. Finally, she said loudly, I knew something wasn't right about that young man's behavior. Other passengers joined the applause, and I felt a mixture of relief and vindication as the truth finally emerged. But the situation was far from over. Derek approached Jennifer, the gate agent, who looked absolutely mortified. Jennifer, I'm going to need you to call your supervisor and report this incident immediately. We also need to review any documentation that Mr. Morrison provided to determine the extent of his fraudulent activities. Jennifer nodded frantically, already reaching for her radio. Yes, sir, Captain Johnson. I'm so sorry this happened. I had no idea he wasn't legitimate. Sarah, the flight attendant who had been intimidated into supporting Trevor's false narrative, approached me with tears in her eyes. Captain Davis, I'm so sorry. I knew something felt wrong about the whole situation, but he seemed so official, and he mentioned having corporate authority. I placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Sarah, it's not your fault. He had fake documentation and used intimidation tactics. You did what you thought was right to protect your job. But the most important revelation was yet to come. A passenger in row 4, a middle-aged woman with short gray hair, stood up and addressed the cabin. Excuse me, everyone. My name is Janet Coleman, and I'm an attorney. I've been recording this entire incident on my phone because something about that young man's behavior seemed suspicious from the beginning. She held up her phone, showing a video that had been running for the past 45 minutes. I have complete documentation of everything that actually happened, including clear evidence that Captain Davis never made any threatening statements and never behaved inappropriately in any way. Trevor, who was being led off the aircraft in handcuffs, turned back with a look of complete despair as he realized that his lies had been captured on video evidence that would prove his guilt beyond any doubt. The aircraft erupted in another round of applause as passengers realized they had witnessed not just the exposure of fraud, but the vindication of an innocent person who had been professionally and personally attacked. Derek announced to the cabin, "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the delay. We'll be departing for Seattle shortly, and I want to personally thank you for your patience during this unusual situation." As Trevor was escorted through the airport terminal, his fake authority and corporate credentials stripped away, the real consequences of his actions were just beginning to unfold. 20 minutes after Trevor's removal from the aircraft, the flight was finally ready for departure. But the atmosphere in the cabin had completely transformed from the tense, uncomfortable mood that had prevailed during the confrontation. Derek made an announcement over the intercom as we prepared for takeoff. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Johnson. I'd like to take a moment to address the incident that delayed our departure. What you witnessed today was an unfortunate case of impersonation and fraud, but it also demonstrated the importance of truth and integrity in aviation." He paused, and I could hear the genuine emotion in his voice. I also want to publicly recognize Captain Ashleigh Davis, who maintained her professionalism and dignity throughout an extremely challenging situation. Captain Davis exemplifies the highest standards of our industry, and we're honored to have her as part of our team. The cabin erupted in spontaneous applause that lasted for nearly a minute. Passengers turned in their seats to look at me, their expressions now filled with respect and admiration rather than suspicion and judgment. Janet Coleman, the attorney who had recorded everything, approached me before takeoff. "Captain Davis, I want to make sure you have a copy of this video evidence. What happened to you today was completely unacceptable, and I hope there will be serious consequences for everyone involved." She transferred the video to my phone, and as I watched the footage, I was struck by how clearly it showed Trevor's manipulative behavior and my own calm responses. The contrast between his aggressive lies and my patient attempts to explain the situation was stark and undeniable. Sarah, the flight attendant, also approached me before we took off. "Captain Davis, I want you to know that I've reported this incident to our union representative and to the Employee Assistance Program. What Trevor did to intimidate me into supporting his false statements was wrong, and I should have been stronger in standing up for what I knew was right." "Sarah," I replied gently, "you were placed in an impossible situation by someone who was deliberately manipulating the system. The important thing is that the truth came out. As we reached cruising altitude, Derek invited me to visit the cockpit as is customary when off-duty pilots are aboard. His co-pilot, a young woman named Lisa Rodriguez, was fascinated to hear about the incident. "I can't believe someone would impersonate corporate authority like that," Lisa said, shaking her head. "And to target a captain of all people. What was he thinking?" "He was thinking that appearance equals authority," I replied. "He saw a woman in casual clothes and assumed I couldn't possibly be someone important. It's a lesson in why we shouldn't judge people based on superficial characteristics." Derek nodded thoughtfully. "This is going to become a training case study, you know. Operations is already talking about using this incident to educate employees about proper verification procedures and the dangers of assuming authority without confirmation." During the flight, my phone buzzed with calls and messages. The first was from the airline's CEO, David Patterson, who had heard about the incident and wanted to apologize personally. "Captain Davis," his message said, "I cannot express how appalled I am by what happened to you today. We're conducting a full investigation into how this individual was able to impersonate company personnel and manipulate our staff. We will also be reviewing our policies to prevent similar incidents in the future." But the most surprising call came from Richard Morrison, Trevor's uncle. "Captain Davis, I cannot begin to apologize for my nephew's behavior. I terminated his internship yesterday after discovering that he had been abusing company privileges and misrepresenting his authority to various vendors and service providers." "What I don't understand," I said, "is how he had so much detailed knowledge about airline policies and procedures." "He spent 3 months observing corporate meetings and customer service operations," Richard explained. "He absorbed a lot of information about company policies, but he clearly didn't absorb anything about ethics or integrity. I take full responsibility for not recognizing his character flaws sooner." Richard continued, "The airline is prepared to offer you whatever compensation or accommodation you feel is appropriate. We're also implementing new verification procedures to prevent anyone from claiming false authority in the future." As we began our descent into Seattle, Janet Coleman shared some additional information she had gathered. "Captain Davis, I did some research during the flight. Trevor Morrison has been involved in similar incidents at 2 other companies where he held internships. There's a pattern of him exaggerating his authority and targeting people he perceives as vulnerable." She handed me a printed report she had compiled. "I think this information might be useful for the criminal charges that will likely be filed against him." But the most meaningful moment came when we landed in Seattle. As passengers were deplaning, many stopped to speak with me personally. The elderly woman who had first applauded Trevor's arrest took my hand and said, "Dear, I've been flying for 60 years and I've never seen such grace under pressure. You represent everything good about aviation." A businessman who had watched the entire incident told me I was ashamed of myself for initially believing that young man's lies. "You've taught me an important lesson about not making assumptions about people." The mother with 2 young children approached with her daughters in tow. "Girls," she said to her children, "this is Captain Davis. She flies big airy airplanes like the one we were just on. And today she showed us how important it is to always tell the truth even when people are being mean to us." Her younger daughter, who couldn't have been more than 6 years old, looked up at me with wide eyes. "Are you really a pilot?" "I really am," I confirmed. "That's so cool," she replied. "I want to be a pilot too." As I walked through the Seattle terminal, my phone continued to buzz with messages from colleagues, friends, and family members who had heard about the incident, but one message stood out from the rest. It was from my father, who had been a pilot for 35 years before retiring. "Sweetheart," it read, "I just heard about what happened today. I'm proud of how you handled yourself, but I'm sorry you had to face that kind of discrimination. Unfortunately, some things about this industry haven't changed as much as we'd hoped, but you're helping to change them by being exactly who you are." That evening, as I settled into my hotel room in Seattle, I reflected on the events of the day. What had started as a quiet positioning flight had become a dramatic reminder of both the challenges and the rewards of working in aviation. But I also realized that this incident, as difficult as it had been, might actually lead to positive changes that would benefit other airline employees and passengers in the future. 6 months later, I was standing at the podium of the Women in Aviation International Conference in Orlando, looking out at an audience of nearly 2,000 pilots, mechanics, air traffic controllers, and aviation students. The conference program listed my presentation as Dignity, Respect, and Professional Excellence Lessons from Flight 723. "Good morning, everyone," I began. 6 months ago, I thought I was taking a routine positioning flight to Seattle. Instead, I found myself at the center of an incident that would change not only my own career, but airline policies across the industry. The audience listened intently as I recounted the events of that day, emphasizing not the personal humiliation I had experienced, but the broader lessons about assumptions, authority, and accountability. "What Trevor Morrison did to me was wrong," I continued, "but it revealed systemic problems that needed to be addressed. His ability to manipulate multiple airline employees and convince them to support his false narrative showed gaps in our verification procedures and training programs. Since the incident, the changes within the airline industry had been swift and comprehensive. The airline had implemented new protocols requiring multiple forms of verification before any passenger could be removed from an aircraft. All customer service personnel now received enhanced training on recognizing and resisting manipulation tactics. But perhaps most importantly, Trevor's story had become a cautionary tale that was being used in business schools and corporate training programs across the country. His uncle, Richard Morrison, had worked with the airline to develop a comprehensive case study that examined how privilege, entitlement, and lack of accountability could lead to serious ethical violations. Trevor Morrison was not born evil, I explained to the conference audience. He was a young man who had been given opportunities and privileges without being taught the responsibility that should accompany them. His actions were inexcusable, but they were also preventable. Trevor himself had undergone a remarkable transformation during the 6 months following the incident. After pleading guilty to multiple charges, including impersonation fraud and filing false police reports, he had been sentenced to 18 months of probation, 300 hours of community service, and mandatory participation in an ethics and accountability program. His community service had been specifically assigned to organizations serving underprivileged youth, and according to reports from his probation officer, the experience had been genuinely eye-opening for him. 3 months after the incident, I had received a handwritten letter from Trevor that demonstrated real remorse and understanding of his actions. "Captain Davis," the letter began, "I know that no apology can undo the humiliation and distress I caused you. I also know that my actions revealed character flaws that I need to spend years working to correct. I want you to know that I am committed to becoming the kind of person who builds others up instead of tearing them down." The letter continued for several pages, detailing the volunteer work he was doing with at-risk teenagers and the lessons he was learning about respect, empathy, and genuine leadership. Sarah, the flight attendant who had been caught between supporting the truth and protecting her job, had become a powerful advocate for employee rights and workplace integrity. She now served on the airline's ethics committee and helped develop training programs to teach employees how to resist manipulation and intimidation. Sarah's experience reminds us that ethical behavior requires courage. I told the conference audience, but it also requires systems and support structures that protect people who choose to do the right thing. Janet Coleman, the attorney who had recorded the entire incident, had used the video evidence to create a legal precedent that strengthened protections for airline employees and passengers who were targeted by fraud or impersonation schemes. Derek Johnson, the captain who had recognized me and helped expose Trevor's lies, had been promoted to chief pilot for the airline's Western region. His calm, professional handling of the crisis had been recognized as exemplary leadership under pressure. But the most meaningful change had been in my own career trajectory. The airline's CEO, David Patterson, had offered me a promotion to Captain of Training and Development with special responsibility for creating programs that address discrimination bias and workplace integrity. The aviation industry has always been built on the principle that competence matters more than appearance, I told the conference audience, but we haven't always lived up to that principle. Incidents like the one I experienced remind us that we need to constantly examine our assumptions and biases. As I concluded my presentation, I shared the broader life lessons that had emerged from that difficult day. First, never underestimate the power of maintaining your dignity under pressure. When someone attacks your character or your qualifications, the best response is to demonstrate through your actions who you really are. Second, the truth has a way of surfacing even when it seems buried under lies and manipulation. Patience and persistence are more powerful than anger and defensiveness. Third, real authority comes from competence, character, and service to others, not from titles, connections, or the ability to intimidate people. Fourth, when we witness injustice, we have a responsibility to speak up and act, even when it's difficult or risky. Janet Coleman's decision to record what she saw helped ensure that truth prevailed over lies. Finally, every crisis contains the seeds of positive change. What happened to me was unpleasant and unfair, but it led to policy changes that will protect countless other people in the future. The audience gave me a standing ovation that lasted for several minutes. During the question and answer session that followed, a young woman in the front row raised her hand. Captain Davis, I'm a flight student, and sometimes I worry about facing discrimination when I start my career. What advice do you have for people who might encounter similar situations? I smiled at her, remembering my own concerns as a young pilot. The best advice I can give you is to focus on becoming so competent at your job that your skills speak louder than any prejudice or assumption. Excellence is the best response to discrimination. But also remember that you're not alone. The aviation community is full of people who will support you and stand up for you when you need it. Never be afraid to ask for help or to speak up when something isn't right. As I left the conference that day, I reflected on how much had changed since that morning on Flight 723. What had seemed like a personal attack had become a catalyst for positive change throughout the industry. But perhaps the most satisfying outcome was a message I had received just that morning from a teenage girl named Maria Santos, who attended the high school where Trevor was doing his community service. Dear Captain Davis, her message read, Trevor told us about what happened between you two and how wrong he was to treat you that way. He's been helping me with my college applications because I want to study aviation engineering. He says that people like you are the reason as aviation is becoming more fair and welcoming for everyone. I hope someday I can meet you and thank you in person for showing us how to handle difficult situations with grace and strength. That message reminded me why the events of that day, difficult as they had ultimately been worth experiencing. Sometimes the most challenging moments in our lives become opportunities to create positive change that extends far beyond our own circumstances. The young woman who had asked about facing discrimination approached me as I was leaving the conference center. Captain Davis, thank you for sharing your story. You've given me the courage to pursue my dreams, no matter what obstacles I might face. What's your name? I asked. Jennifer Walsh, she replied. I'm a sophomore at Embry-Riddle studying aeronautical science. Well, Jennifer, I hope our paths cross again in the cockpit someday. The industry needs more people who are committed to excellence and integrity. As I drove to the airport for my flight home, I thought about how different my life had become since that day 6 months ago. What had started as a humiliating confrontation had evolved into a platform for positive change and meaningful work. I also thought about Trevor Morrison, who had learned that real leadership means lifting others up, not putting them down. His transformation from entitled intern to committed advocate for others showed that people can change when they're willing to face their mistakes and work to make amends. The aviation industry, like all industries, still has work to do in creating truly inclusive and respectful environments for everyone. But incidents like the one I experienced, while painful in the moment, help us identify problems and create solutions that benefit everyone. As I boarded my flight home, the gate agent recognized me and smiled warmly. "Captain Davis, it's an honor to have you flying with us today. Thank you for everything you've done for our industry." That simple gesture of respect and recognition reminded me why I love aviation and why the challenges we face are worth overcoming. Every day we have the opportunity to treat each other with dignity and respect, regardless of appearance, background, or position. The flight home was peaceful and uneventful, exactly the kind of routine journey that I had been hoping for 6 months ago when I first boarded Flight 723. But I was no longer the same person who had quietly taken her seat that day. I was someone who had faced unfair treatment with grace, who had seen truth triumph over lies, and who had used a difficult experience to create positive change for others. And that I realized was a transformation worth celebrating. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever experienced a situation where someone made assumptions about you based on your appearance or background? How did you handle it, and what did you learn from the experience? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like this video if it resonated with you. If you enjoyed this story about standing up for what's right and finding strength in difficult situations, please subscribe to our channel for more inspiring tales of courage and resilience. And please share this video with someone who might need to hear this message about dignity, respect, and the power of truth. Thank you so much for listening, and remember, your character is revealed not by how you treat people who can help you, but by how you treat people who can't. Until next time, keep flying high and treating others with the respect and dignity that everyone deserves.